The haunted Airbnb, true stories from guests who will never forget. The house on Elmsmere Street. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. An Airbnb cabin nestled on a quiet street just outside the city, promising peace, privacy, and fresh air. But from the moment they arrived, something felt wrong. There was a heaviness in the air that didn't belong, an unseen weight pressing against their chests. The host, a woman with sharp features and unsettlingly vacant eyes, handed them the key with a forced smile. "Enjoy your stay," she said, her voice thin and brittle, like dry leaves crumbling in the wind. But it wasn't the woman's words that unnerved them. It was the feeling that the house was watching, waiting for them. As they drove away, the sense of dread only deepened. The cabin itself stood isolated, shadowed by tall, twisted trees that seemed to bend unnaturally toward the building. The lights flickered above them as they entered, casting long, jagged shadows across the hardwood floors. There was something wrong with the lighting too, like the house itself wasn't entirely connected to reality. At first, they tried to brush it off as exhaustion. But by nightfall, the unease grew unbearable. "Did you hear that?" one of them whispered, breaking the silence that had filled the house like a thick fog. A distant creak echoed from above, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, as though someone was pacing in the attic. "Probably the house settling," another replied, though the words tasted false in their mouth. But no one could shake the feeling that something was lurking in the dark corners of the house, something they couldn't see but could feel watching them. That night they couldn't sleep. The atmosphere was thick with an unseen presence, suffocating, relentless. And then they heard it, the whispering. Low at first, like a murmur carried through the walls. It wasn't clear, but it was unmistakable. A voice. No, many voices, all whispering at once. The sound crawled beneath their skin, curling and twisting, so close they could feel the breath of the words against their necks. Suddenly the air turned cold. The temperature dropped, and their breath became visible in front of them, a sign of something far more sinister than the house's draft. They looked at each other, fear blooming in their eyes. They ran to the window only to find the world outside different. The streetlights flickered, the shadows darker than they should have been. And then they saw it. A shape in the distance, moving in and out of the darkness, too tall, too slender, too unnatural. A figure watching them from the edge of the trees. It didn't move like a human, didn't breathe like one. It was wrong. It was only then that they realized they were not alone in this house. The house knew them. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. They turned away from the window only to face the walls, which seemed to warp, bending inwards as if the house itself was closing in on them. The door rattled, and for a brief moment, they thought they saw the outline of something standing just behind it, a shadow without form, watching. And then the door burst open. It didn't swing, it exploded open with the force of an unseen hand. The air was thick with the smell of rot, of decay. They heard footsteps, but these weren't the slow, calculated ones from before. These were heavy, urgent, moving toward them with a purpose. Panic set in. One tried to run, but the others could only stand frozen, trapped in the room as the walls seemed to close in, the air suffocating their lungs. They wanted to scream, to call for help, but their voices were swallowed by the oppressive silence, drowned beneath the weight of something ancient, something terrifying that no longer cared for the living. Suddenly they all looked toward the mirror across the room. In the reflection there was a figure standing behind them. A tall, emaciated figure with glowing eyes, its mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin. It was the same figure they had seen outside, the one watching them from the trees. It wasn't just a shadow. It was real. And it had been with them since the moment they arrived. But it wasn't just the house that had been watching them. As they stared into the mirror, one by one their faces began to change. Their eyes grew wide, blackened, like they were no longer their own. Their skin twisted and contorted, as if something was crawling beneath it, pulling them toward the inevitable. The reflection didn't stop at just them, it was as if the figure in the mirror was pulling something out of them. Something that they couldn't fight. And that's when they realized the truth. They were never meant to leave this house. As the room spun, the darkness pressing closer, they felt the cold, invisible hands of the entity pulling at them, clawing at their bodies and souls. The house had claimed them. Their presence had awakened something that had slept for centuries. Now they were part of it, trapped, forever, inside the nightmare they had dared to enter. The last thing they saw was the figure in the mirror, smiling. Do you want to know what happened next? Subscribe to the channel and prepare yourself because you'll never be alone again. The entity awakens. There is a rule about haunted places. Once you've crossed their threshold, there's no leaving. Not really. And the moment they crossed into that cursed house, they sealed their fate. For a long while they thought they had managed to escape. The figure in the mirror had vanished and the air felt lighter. They convinced themselves that perhaps they had imagined it, that their fears had simply run wild in the darkness. But the unease never left. It lingered, no, it waited, in every creak of the floorboards and every flicker of the lights. It wasn't over. They never should have stayed. The house had already marked them and now it was alive, alive in ways they couldn't comprehend. Night after night, the whispers returned, softer at first but growing louder, more insistent, as though something was calling to them, pulling them in deeper. It wasn't just the house that watched them anymore, it was the thing inside it, the entity that had been bound to the house for centuries, waiting for fresh souls to claim. The figure in the trees? It hadn't been real. Not in the way they thought. It wasn't an apparition. It was a manifestation of the house itself, a manifestation of the evil that had always been there, waiting to consume. But what they hadn't realized was that the evil wasn't bound by the walls or the windows or even time. No, it was far more insidious. It was the air itself, the very fabric of the house, and now they were part of it. The house had taken a piece of them, and with every passing second, they could feel it growing, changing, until they could no longer remember where the house ended and where they began. One evening, while they sat huddled together, a strange noise broke the silence. At first, they thought it was just another crack of the house settling, until it repeated. This time it sounded like scratching. From beneath the floorboards. Frantic. Hungry. The walls too began to warp. They could feel them closing in around them, suffocating, pulsing with a dark energy that made their heads spin. The house wasn't just alive, it was feeding on them, drawing them in. They tried to scream for help, but their voices were swallowed by the oppressive silence, too deep to reach the outside world. But it was no use. There was no one left to hear them. The figure from the mirror reappeared that night. Only it wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was standing before them in the center of the room, its mouth wide open, its smile stretching unnaturally. Its eyes were black voids, endless, pulling them into its abyss. It wasn't human. It wasn't even a thing. It was the house, all of it, wrapped in a nightmare of flesh and shadow, eyes staring into theirs like it knew them better than they knew themselves. And then it spoke. You should not have stayed. The words were cold, hollow, reverberating through the air, crawling up their spines. The air around them turned heavy, thick, like something was pressing down on their chests, choking the life from them. You opened the door. You invited me in. And that's when they understood. The house had always been the evil. It was never just a building, never just walls and rooms. The house was alive, and it had been feeding off of the fear of those who entered. It had been watching, learning, evolving. And now it was done waiting. It had already started to consume them, slowly, imperceptibly, in ways they couldn't see but could feel. They weren't alone. They never had been. The walls shuddered. The floor beneath their feet buckled and split. Something rose from the ground, an unnatural shadow that stretched toward them with unnatural speed. It was cold, so cold, colder than any death could ever be. It's inside you now. One by one, their bodies betrayed them. They could feel the presence crawling inside of them, seeping into their bones, into their thoughts, taking hold of their very souls. They were no longer human. They were extensions of the house, extensions of the evil that had claimed it. And then, as if some final piece of their humanity broke away, the house did something that froze the very blood in their veins. It turned them into echoes, reflections of themselves, trapped in an endless loop, reliving the moment they first stepped through the door. It wasn't just their bodies that had been taken, it was their consciousness. It had consumed them all. And now they were bound, trapped in the house forever, unable to escape. Their voices would never be heard. Their cries would never fade. They had become part of the evil, part of the story, part of the nightmare. But what's worse? As you listen to this story, as you hear every word, you're not just hearing a tale. You've invited it in too. The house is already waiting for you. Do you dare to stay? If you do, don't forget to subscribe. And with that, the nightmare lingers, ever present, feeding on your fear. Because now the house knows you. The house watches. And the worst part? It knows you heard the story. This isn't over. Not for you.